Hello, 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 y'all. Hopefully, you can hear me good. I am fortunate enough to be bringing Anne to you here today, and of course, as you guys know, if she's here, there's a reason she's here. She's got some value gems in her mind that is my job to extract. So, Anne, who the heck are you, and what are you doing here today?
Thank you for having me. I am a public speaker. I am a futurist, and I am also a data analyst. So my area covers quite a motley crew of different interests, I guess.
Hmm. So let's just start with that. I know a lot of public speakers. There's a few different kinds that I've been fortunate enough to meet so far, but a lot of times, especially people working in tech, when someone imagines someone working in tech, they imagine them at a computer coding all day, right? Not leaving the room, and that's kind of it. But a lot of the stuff you mentioned sounds like you're in tech, design, data science, all that kind of stuff. Where does public speaking play into your kind of day-to-day operations while you do and kind of fulfill these things as well?
Yeah, it's interesting you're asking about that because I think that I kind of defaulted into public speaking, not because I
Mm,
decided to get up on a stage and be a public speaker. It had more to do with uh, subject matter expertise in my areas that got recognition, and then there was an interest in communicating that on a wider stage in certain cases. Um, and Yeah, the way I see it is just one specific arm of communication. I mean, code is also communication.
mm.
So, there's different ways of communicating with the world around you, and speaking is more of that natural connection with the person, right? So in front of you. So that's kind of how I ended up in public speaking. It wasn't a deliberate decision that
Mm.
now I'm going to become a public speaker and I'm going to learn um, to how to do that. I would say I probably failed forward in many ways because I had more grasp over my content area, maybe more than the speaking initially, and I kind of had to learn that as a skill later.
And so a lot of times someone will. That's very interesting. A lot of times a speaker that goes from an aspiring speaker, someone that wants to speak, to then being a professional speaker, there's a lot of intention behind it to make that transition.
Yeah.
So how did you go about just having it kind of, you said by default? Tell me more about how that kind of happened.
I was invited to four different keynotes and opening keynotes, different breakout sessions. So again, it just kind of happened uh, by default because I did cover some areas. As a futurist, I had a blog and a website, and which kind of grew into my own consulting firm, and I got attention that way by having people interested in the topics that I would be researching and writing about. And from then on, it was quite a few of the uh, engagements that I got from that. In some cases, it would be consulting and working more on the back end, and in some cases, it would be to precisely to go and speak to a larger organization or association. Um, so yeah, so again, it wasn't a deliberate choice. It was just something that came as a consequence of what I was studying. Yeah.
And so you started off with this website and blog. Can you tell me more about how you kind of got started with that?
Hmm. Um, yeah, I think it was interest driven. It had to do with an interest in hoping to work for myself. To be honest, I was at a phase of life where that kind of work environment fit me better than regular corporate work, and so and again, like I mentioned, I started the website more as a kind of trying to keep a conversation going in a specific area that I was researching, and kind of develop some sort of thought leadership in that area. And then because the audience kind of came to me and I didn't do any specific to reach out to them, then they also kind of shaped that narrative. Like they shaped the requests and the type of needs that they needed. So I think in many ways I was very open-minded about which ways that I could communicate with these companies that were interested in my services, whether that was in the form of consulting or speaking or data analysis in the background. And so speaking was part of that. Yeah.
Hmm. And obviously going from, not knowing a ton about a subject to then being a thought leader, considered a thought leader in the subject, how did you go from just having interest in it and knowing your interest, to then kind of going all in with it and really learning about it and kind of turning that page to then have the credibility to be invited on the speaking gigs and people see, okay, she knows her stuff. I want to have her speak. How did you kind of make that decision to go into what you're an expert in now?
So it wasn't that like I just jumped out in the deep end and decided to, now I'm going to leverage subject matter expertise in something I didn't have experience in. I did have education in the relevant field. And I had also been consulting for a firm, for several firms, for other consulting firms prior. So I had some areas. So I had, I guess, I didn't start from scratch, to put it that way, if that's what you're
Mm,
asking. I don't think it's possible. I'm not sure, but I feel like you need to kind of have some years in the fields. Malcolm Gladwell, who talks about the 10,000 hours, I
yeah.
don't know. I mean, I don't know exactly how to quantify it, but I know that you need to have a certain area of expertise in what you're going to be speaking about. And I really feel like that is also how you are going to project your message the best way as well. If you have in-depth knowledge, not just like surface knowledge. And saying that, it doesn't mean that I had a lot of in-depth knowledge. I'm not saying that, but I think that is one of those variables that you really need to kind of consider. I think a, often there's a lot of emphasis on form and not so much about content.
Mm,
Um, and I think it's very important to really emphasize content as well, because that's how you are going to be able to evangelize. That's how you're going to be able to provide a deeper understanding and perhaps a different narrative than what is already projected in the public conversations.
mm.
So at least that's how it was for me. That was kind of, and that's again why I did not choose to go out and be on a stage and talk about something
Right.
I don't know about. So yeah.
And what is a futurist?
In my case, it is
Mhm.
the diploma that is hanging on my wall. I actually have a master's degree in future studies or strategic foresight. So it is actually an academic field. It
Cool.
is something that many people don't think about. That I think many people, you know, like to think about, like, if you are engaged in talking about things that could happen in the future, or if you're engaged with predicting or forecasting what might happen in the future, then you're automatically a futurist. But it's actually a fairly established methodology, and there's a framework, there's a thought framework around it. There's a certain sort of worldviews that most futurists agree on. For example, that being able to predict unknown unknowns is virtually impossible, and therefore, when we're discussing the future, we can't really predict because there's too many. It's too complex. There's too many unknown
Mm,
unknowns. And then there are other things we can agree on, that there are certain things that are more predictable, like the known knowns, like the ones that you
mm,
can actually say with a certain level of certainty that these will happen because we already have the data. Um, and then many futurists then will go out in the field and project different scenarios, which means that you're looking at all of these different possibilities, these configurations of possible futures, and then you essentially create an image around it, and you try to help people have an experience with that type of future image, if you will. Sort of, that's not been my area as much. I think in my case, I have focused more, at least for the past 10 years or so, I've been digging deeper into data analysis. And so in my case, I have come to the realization that the way that how you understand the future is very much based on how you understand the present.
Hmm.
So if you don't have a very rich, data-driven canvas or map of where we are in the present moment, you may have assumptions and so contingencies about how you envision the future that may in fact not be reflected in current reality. We talk about the future's cone, where we think of the future as, like, if you look at the horizontal line, that's kind of like the baseline future. And then you can think of it as a cone where you could go a little bit up from that, you could go a little bit uh, away from that. The more you kind of diverge from that assumed baseline future, the more you're able to talk about these various scenarios where there's different sort of logical framework around those different future images. But then what is the baseline? So
Hmm.
in my case, it's been an effort to try to really have a good understanding of the baseline of what is happening today by having a very rich data repository and using something we call a steep approach, which is that you really look at like a 360 view of everything that is happening in the macro condition of that particular area that you're looking at, that specific problem or question that you're looking at, because everything will be influenced somewhat of environmental conditions, economical conditions, social conditions, cultural. All of that will have an impact, and it's your job as a futurist to try to kind of build um, that narrative around it to kind of understand what's happening. And how can you do that if you don't have all the data around it, right? Or if you
Hmm.
have misleading data. And I think that is another thing that we're maybe facing a little bit more, that we can't necessarily trust the face value of all of the narratives and the headlines and the data that we're being presented with, because there's so much information and much of that information is not really vetted. So kind of combining this sort of data driven perspective together with this acknowledgement that you can't predict the future, you can only predict a baseline, has kind of been the area where I've been maybe lending my insights a little bit more in the recent years.
And you were saying you touched on something, how the future, there's such an almost overabundance of information, and the future can be so complex. Where do you say is your like slice of the pie that you're super honed in on, of like the future in technology, the future in finance, or the future in, and then all the little micro niches under that more macro size niche? Where do you say your specialty is?
You know, what I find the most fascinating is to look at that intersection between technology and humans.
Interesting.
First of all, to understand technological architecture to a level where you can specifically talk about, what might that future look like. And recently, for example, the past few, yeah, ever since maybe OpenAI launched ChatGPT,
Hmm.
there's been a tendency to want to talk about AI and like what AI is and what that's going to mean for the future. The problem with that is that AI is not a thing. It's a concept. It's a loose umbrella term where there are many, many different types of AI, or I would call it machine learning models, that are created to solve very different problems. And so if we just kind of use an umbrella term to project how people will interact with AI in the future, it's a little bit like saying, okay, I like eggs for breakfast, so I'm going to go buy some animals. You know what I mean? Because you don't know.
Hmm.
Yeah, there are animals that are laying eggs, but not all of them. Maybe you shouldn't buy a lion if you want
Yeah.
eggs. So there's, and I think that's where maybe also having like in-depth understanding of areas. I think the best foresight projects is where you have many different people with different types of subject matter expertise, uh, influencing a project, but also not only that, but also testing their own assumptions by actually doing the analysis of finding out like what is the reality on the ground in my field, what is happening right now, and how do I communicate that to to a larger audience, so that we can kind of shape that conversation right from the get-go.
Can I ask you a specific question regarding the intersection of technology and human in the future on that and hear what you think?
Yeah.
Tesla's humanoid robots, Neuralink, Elon Musk, combined with OpenAI, potential cyborg humans in the future. What is your knowledge on this, and where do you see the baseline regarding that hemisphere, so to speak, going?
Mm. So my understanding with Neuralink or any of these sort of brain interfaces, the little chips that you can plant in your brain,
Mm.
it's a one-way street. It's not like it's not like you can create, sort of merge into with an AI and become an AI just because you have that. It's more a prosthetic where you are using your own brain waves that somehow get digitized, and I don't know too much about that area. I work more in the predictive analytics field. Um, but even if you're even so that prosthetic is more like, okay, my brain wants my arm to lift this glass over there, but I'm paralyzed and I can't do it. So you know what I mean? It's like it's
Yeah.
helping that neuroplasticity in your brain to signal what your brain wants to do in the real world. I am not familiar, and I've heard interviews with Elon Musk as well, where he's also refuting, at least it was, and things have changed obviously, but where he was refuting the possibility of going the other way, like where you can kind of get a super brain by using this interface. So it's not like you can hook yourself up to a large language model and all of a sudden now you're Einstein, right?
Mm.
My understanding is that. Um, Now, I'm not really seeing how that interfaces with a Tesla. Like, I'm assuming you mean like a self-driving car. Not. Mhm.
I was gonna say, I mean more of the they built this humanoid robot that looks very much like a human format, but it's a robot that helps with their systems and processes and building the cars and that kind of thing. But if you're not familiar with it, totally not a problem. So for when you say like technology and human intersection, what does that mean to you? Because I might hear that and I might understand that in a different
Oh,
way than you understand it.
yeah. No, it's more, how do we leverage technology?
Okay.
What do our businesses want and need? What does the market want and need? And now I'm talking about sustainable needs and something that is actually solving a real world problem. Like, what is there to stay? Obviously there are two components here. We have to think of both, about like what is the developmental trajectory for the technology itself, sort of where are the constraints and what is the opportunities in that field, and also like what is it that people actually going to want and what is not going to be just a flash in the pan. I'm not going to say that creating interesting images on Midjourney is a flash in the pan, because I think it has a real world functionality. It serves a real world issue, but I mean that might be kind of limited to stock photos, right? I mean,
Mm.
yeah, it might be something more, and I'm sure that there are going to be very bright minds that are going to leverage that and package that into a different concept, different product. But beyond that, I mean, is it revolutionary that in and by itself? Probably not. And at the same time, we also have to look at sort of like the foundation models and what are some of the other use cases and applications that they will actually serve, that serves a much wider area and provides a solution to a much bigger problem. And that's where I think that we're sometimes a little bit off, because as humans we tend to get really excited about the latest and nicest shiniest thing,
Sure.
and then we don't always think about, oh, okay, but what am I actually solving for, right? Like what is the real sustained problem that I really want to find a solution for, or this business, and is it worth investing billions of dollars in that? So that's kind of
Mm.
more what I mean, like real world applications.
Okay.
Yeah.
What do you see with the future of augmented reality and maybe on top of that virtual reality?
So I'm going to sound I'm actually going to sound a little bit old fashioned here. We've tried this. I don't know, have you seen the Lawnmower Man? It's an old movie
Hmm.
from the 90s.
Okay.
Yeah, it was actually one of the I believe one of the first VR related movies where yeah it pretty much tackles that particular you know um, problem where there's this guy who's able to kind of live out a completely different persona in a different virtual reality world. It didn't really kick things off then that time. It's had a few stabs later, like in the 2000s and early 2010s. So there's been like some products released on the market. I think some of it has to do with functionality of the hardware itself. Like it's not very feasible to walk around with like these
Yeah.
big
Yeah.
chunky glasses, obviously. And most people will not kind of get home from work and like, hey, I'm going to hook myself up to this haptic interface and like all of these big instruments, and I'm
Mm.
going to have fun in I don't know, like in this kind of metaverse reality. I think that might be a fun thing to do, like when you don't have anything. So it's like one extra concept of entertainment. But again, I fail to see how in a day-to-day reality. I mean, definitely there are specific areas. For example, if you are practicing surgery or very fine-tuned robotics, or so that there are definitely areas, especially in the work fields, where these can fill a specific need. But again, that's very niche. So we had a few years back too. I remember my kids when they were younger. They would be walking around with their phones. So we're looking for Pokemon figures,
Yeah.
like yeah. And again, it was fun. I do kind of put it a little bit in the same category as Midjourney. It's like each time there's somebody's finessing that technology, and we get a new product coming out, and we indulge in that for a little bit, and we have fun with it, and it's fun for a while. But if unless you can really put it on a specific use case where it actually solves a real world problem, and we do have a lot of problems in this world. So unless it actually fixes a sustained issue, and often those issues are also monetized. So like usually there's like a financial incentive underpinning that as well. So I see it more as entertainment at this point.
Hmm. And so going back to what you were talking about with you started with your site, your website, your blog, and now you're doing speaking. What are some other ways you're growing your personal brand and your knowledge base and exposure and visibility right now as a speaker, as a thought leader?
That's a good question because I've kind of neglected that for a while. I do also work. I've been pulled in more into management, IT management, and have worked quite a bit, spent a lot of my time with that, with managing large projects and teams and launches and product launches and things of that nature. So I will admit that I'm probably not, I haven't done as much as I probably should. Um, I think I'm trying to think like, what is the best advice? Because I know that that's what we probably want to do here is like, how can I help advise anybody who's kind of like at the start of that journey? And and as of recent, I haven't really pushed myself into those fields. It's been more in an on demand type of thing where I come in and do speaking and communication or value delivery wherever for people who are interested in my specific brand. If that makes sense, I don't
Hmm.
know.
Yeah, and
So
I think that touches on a very specific pain point that I think a lot of people have as well, where they do have a job, they do have work that they're doing, but they have maybe this one thing that they're such an absolute nerd about, they're so passionate about, but they don't feel like they can dive into that for
yeah,
anything more than a hobby. And I think you kind of are showing in your evidence that, hey, I can work all these jobs, all these gigs, for all these consulting firms, and build this personal brand and do speaking and have this website that I provide value to people at the same time, and it actually functions as kind of a lead magnet for speaking gigs, for consulting gigs, all these kind of things. So I think maybe speak to that person that they're busy working a 9 to 5 and they're really good at something and they have a very strong interest in something, but they didn't even consider that they could monetize it in the way you've been able to monetize your interest in futurism.
Yeah, yeah. You know, I'm a big believer in trying to find very useful overlaps, and I'm
Mm,
lucky in the sense that I work in the same field that I have some speaking. Not completely. There's a there's a little bit of it. There's definitely, and I wouldn't be able to speak on what I do in my day job because there are way too many. There's a lot of confidentiality issues there. So I'm able to kind of speak more generally on the things that I get exposed to, but by kind of overlapping that more with the other type of background that I also have. So kind of it's more like, if you're able to see that the sweet spot is really where you have two different areas, especially if you have one that is a little bit more, that has more like business demand, where really there's a lot of demand. And then you have your unique kind of take on that, and you see where that overlaps, and you see kind of like that sweet spot. Now that's your place, and that's where you can leverage something very unique. And so what I would recommend is that that's where you could probably probe a little bit deeper and see what are some of the demands in the market, or like latent demands that I haven't really been really verbalized as much. Maybe you are the one that is actually going out in the world and communicating that here's a really interesting area. um, and I think that helps sets you apart, because otherwise it's very easy to sort of kind of we see that somebody is very, have a lot of success with one particular type of narrative or like style or anything
mhm.
like that.
Yeah.
But then if you follow that, you're not yourself, you're not authentic.
Right.
So you have to find yourself. I think that's the other advice that I would say. Don't just try to fit into a brand. I remember one time I lost a very lucrative speaking gig because I was a little bit skeptical. And again, that had to do with some of those technologies where I'm a little bit bearish. And when I say I'm bearish on it, it doesn't mean that I don't see a use case for it. It's just like the current generations of those type of products have not really found the real uh, reason for existing in society. And I think that's
Mm,
what I communicated. But I think that what they wanted was someone who could sort of basically, you know, just talk about that technology as if it was the next big thing. That doesn't always age very well. So like if you want to keep like if you want to keep some durability and sustainability in your area, and the area that you have special competence, don't just accept any type of offer to go and talk about things that may not fall into your understanding of reality around you. It needs to be authentic. It needs to be something that you actually believe in. Um, yeah. So I guess
mm,
authenticity and finding that very specific area. And with authenticity, I don't mean being like not willing to change your mind. Obviously, if you're so mired in your own understanding about how the world works, and you won't be able to change, and you won't be able to kind of grasp, go into new areas and new niches. And it's definitely fine to get up on the stage and say, you know what, 2 years ago I thought this, and I changed my mind, and this is why. you know so definitely that's a good thing to do, but don't be like that person who's like, okay, so now this company is hiring me, so now I need to speak about that. Oh, next week this company is hiring me, so now I need to speak about something else. Then now in the world where everything is being recorded, like if somebody really wants to kind of see, oh, what does this person actually stand for? So that's
mm,
very important. Authenticity is really important, I would say.
mm. That's powerful. And right now, all of your speaking gigs are inbound, warm inbound leads, correct? Like people reaching out to you saying, "Hey, can you come speak? We saw you wrote this. It's amazing stuff."
Yeah, most of the time, yeah, that's what it is.
For that's like a goal of a lot of speakers, is to have all their gigs just be, yeah, yeah, come in, I'll absolutely speak for you. Whereas I think a lot of speakers, including me, we have to do a lot of cold outbound to the event planners, the decision makers. um, for you've already got kind of the oven cooking, so to speak. What would you be you've already gone from 0 to 1 in your speaking. What would you need to do to go from 1 to 10? Or is that even something you would want to do, right? If you want to do more speaking gigs, get a higher speaking fee, all that kind of stuff. Or is that not even something you're like, no, I'm kind of good with my jobs. I'm loving it, making good money, helping people, enjoy what I'm doing. I don't really want to even grow my speaking business anymore. I like it where it's at.
It kind of goes back to how I ended up in that. I never sought out for that to become my main source of income. I think if you identify that this is what I'm going to do, this is what I'm good at, this is what I love, and that becomes more important to you than getting sort of like more in-depth experience in operations or in strategy or whatever. If your job is to be that speaker and that is kind of like a business model, obviously I think it's a very good idea to do a lot more outbound marketing. I just never really, I mean, I wish I could, but I've never been that person who kind of, I don't know. Yeah. But um yeah, in my own life at the moment, it hasn't been like this huge need for that. And I think also it's because, so the thing about like when you have a very specific niche, when you have an area that you think is important, but it might not kind of fall into like a specific area. It's just like it's kind of a little bit of this and a little bit of that. You're going to feel a very specific and unique need, and if you see that in the future this is probably going to be an issue that people are interested in, then keep doing it. It's going to be a slow start because people don't understand it and people don't know what they don't know, right? So you have to kind of explain a little bit what it is that you do and where sort of your specific insights and competence fits in. And then you need to find those specific events. And a lot of times what people want is not, what event planners and audiences want is not always to kind of, it's not necessary to learn about that particular thing that you're interested in. So but at the same time, you will then develop a specific expertise in that area. And I think it's going to be a lot more fulfilling because you have carved out something that kind of speaks to your again, to your authenticity and what you really want to bring to them. I mean, it's not fun to go up on a stage and just say what everybody else is saying, right? I mean, what's the point? It's kind of like, why did you fly me out here to say something that they could, read in a book or they could see somewhere else? Like everybody wants to kind of put their own little spin on it, right? So, yeah.
And where can people find you on the internet? If they've been listening to Anne, they're thinking, oh my gosh, where can I find her? Where can I find this awesome site, this blog she's got? Where can they kind of go online and stalk you, right? And see what you're doing and follow the content you're making and just make you kind of part of their life for what you've been saying so far, if they're super interested in it.
I would say just connect with me on LinkedIn. That's probably the best. And yeah, you can check out now. I haven't posted there for a long time, but that's, and it's probably better to kind of talk to me directly. I also have a speaking site. I won't say that I have a speaking site, but I have some subpages on my blog. It's called afterthemillennial.com. If you do /speaking, then you can see kind of the past talks that I've done. And some of them, maybe not all of them, and some of them will be linked, so you can take a look at that as well. I should probably make a better effort of posting that specific site somewhere. I don't know. I just never gotten around to make that a standalone kind of website. So that would be.
Okay, awesome. So that's your LinkedIn. Do you want to say your full name and the letters just so everyone knows? They don't want to mistype it.
Yep. It's ANNEBOYSEN. That's how you spell my name. And I just say that because for some reason people misspell it. So it's also the first part of my or it's part of, if you want to look me up on LinkedIn, uh, and or reach out to me any other way. Yeah.
Awesome. And so, what last question for you here? From this entire journey you've had, what would you say is one piece of advice or one knowledge nugget that you would want to give to the aspiring speaker, the professional speaker, or the entrepreneur that speaks to grow their business?
Can I give two?
Please, however many you want.
Okay. I'm going to start with your nerves, because most people, public speaking is the number one fear. And people are actually more afraid of public speaking than death, because there's a lot of like falling down from heights and dangerous spiders, all of that stuff. Um, I had a drama teacher when I went to high school, and I've never forgotten this. I was very nervous. I was going to play a role, and she said, "You can allow yourself to own your nerves all until you get out there on a very specific area on stage where you are supposed to be. And I want you to imagine that there's like a ring, like a glowing ring, and you're going to go into that glowing ring. Once you're in that circle, all nerves are going to be gone." And you basically tell yourself that. So it allows you to not ignore your feelings, ignore your emotions, because it's a tense situation. Because if you tell yourself, like, "I'm not going to be nervous, I'm not going to be nervous," it just kind of knocks on your door even tighter, right? But you basically are making a deal with your own emotions. The lizard brain. You're basically telling the lizard brain, "I'm going to listen to you. I'm going to let you kind of have your little tantrum until a certain point, and that's when the id is going to take over, and then that's when it's going to flow." And it really helps. Maybe, I don't know. It really helped for me. There's another thing that I think also helps: crafting a really good story. Like, really try to captivate your audience very early on. Then you need to substantiate that story with some data, like, just so they know it's not just something that you came up with. It actually has a real world application. And then now you want to show some kind of tension. You want to show like the, where the world really is, and where you really, if you had this other idea, this other tool, this other thing you want to do, how that can help. And then you kind of get to that resolution. And sometimes you can tie it back to the first story that you mentioned, that were you full circle. That helps a lot. It's a much more interesting way of delivering a message than if you just like went with, like bullet points. And it really ties back into Aristotle's rhetoric, where you have the ethos, pathos, logos. You need all of those elements to have a really, really good story. So that would be my main recommendation to anybody who's trying to go into speaking.
And how many times have you used that tip about the ring? Because I visualize it and I see that could work very well. I'm even going to start to use that tip in my speaking. How long have you been using that, and how has it been performing for you?
It really depends kind of what the audience is as well.
Sure.
A lot of what I do is just basically technical presentations where it doesn't really allow you to do that. But I am actually trying more and more. I want to say most of my talks aspire to use that format, but it can feel forced. I'm not going to say that like there's no rule without exceptions, right? And there are certain topics that it just doesn't fit into that. But it almost always helps to start with a hook, to start with something. Don't start with this like, "I am this person, I come from that background, these are the letters after my name," like, yeah, you can kind of build that authority throughout your talk by showing that you know what you know, like you have substance knowledge, not that you dwell too much on all the letters behind your name and where you went to school and all of that. And chances are, after the first 30 seconds, especially now that people are getting more and more goldfish memories, and we have these phones everywhere, and like people are distracted easily.
Yeah.
So you really need to start with something that grabs them. And then that's when you also need to know kind of what is my audience, right? Am I speaking to a bunch of CEOs? Am I speaking to Gen Z, teenagers and Gen Zs? Like, who are actually the ones that I'm trying to engage here? And maybe that's actually the crux of it as well, is really knowing your audience. Who are you speaking to? What do they want? How can you actually make a difference with what you're speaking about?
Well, there we go. And over here dropping bombs of value. Well, guys, if you're listening here and you found what Anne has been sharing super valuable, you know where to DM her on LinkedIn. And if you have someone that you think has a just needs that nudge, and you think maybe they are like what Anne you mentioned of they're like deathly afraid of speaking, or even more than death, but need to hear someone speaking on it like she has, and that can make the difference between them staying not speaking versus getting on stage. And thank you for taking the time to do this. And guys, thank you for listening. Cheers,
Thank
y'all.
you so much for having me.